Hazel Whitlock was 27 years old when her ex-husband stood up at his own wedding reception and dared her to go find better. 200 people laughed. She had sworn she wouldn't come. She'd told herself that 100 times in the mirror, and she came anyway, because there was one thing only Grant Hollis could give her that night, and he knew it. That's why the invitation had been mailed to the school where she taught 4th grade, instead of to her apartment. That's why it arrived on a Monday, when the whole staff room would see it. Hazel wore the same gray dress she'd worn to 4 weddings before this one. She drove 90 minutes up the coast in a car that stalled at every red light, and when she finally got close enough to ask him quietly for what she'd come for, Grant laughed, tilted the microphone toward her, and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. "If you think you can find better than me, sweetheart, go ahead. Go find him." The bride laughed the loudest. She'd been Hazel's best friend for 9 years. What Grant didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, on a rainy night in Federal Hill, Hazel had walked into the wrong restaurant and lost her temper at a man she'd never seen before, in a room full of men who hadn't dared to breathe. She knew his first name. She'd never asked him for the rest of it, and she couldn't tell you why, only that some part of her didn't want the answer. But he'd just walked through the ballroom doors. Hazel never got the chance to answer her ex-husband. A hand settled on her shoulder, warm, steady, in no hurry at all. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart." Then that voice turned toward the groom, calm as a weather report. "Raymond Marchetti. Hazel's my wife." Nobody in that room laughed anymore, because half the people standing there knew exactly what that name meant, and Grant Hollis was one of them. So did Hazel. Now, if this story pulls you in, go ahead and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe, because we tell one of these every single day. To understand how a quiet teacher ended up standing beside a man like Marchetti, we have to go back to where it all began with a cold pizza, a quiet classroom, and a debt that was never meant to be hers. The pizza had been cold since noon, and Hazel Whitlock held it up before 22 4th graders, as though it were the most precious thing in the room. She set it on the plastic cutting board, picked up the cafeteria's dull plastic knife, and made one clean cut straight through the middle. 2 equal parts, she said. "Now I have 1/2. Who can tell me how to write 1/2? Several hands went up. She cut again. 4 parts. 8 parts. By the time the pizza lay in 8 small, misshapen slices, she asked the question she always asked at this exact moment, the question she had written into her very first lesson plan in 2020. "If I eat 3 slices, how much of the whole pizza have I eaten?" The room went quiet. Then, from the last row of desks, a small hand rose slowly and uncertainly, as though the girl were still deciding whether to pull it back down. Mia Kessler, 9 years old. She had transferred to the school at the beginning of September, and in the entire month since then, she hadn't spoken a single word during class. Hazel kept her voice as ordinary as she possibly could. "Mia, 3/8", the girl said, so softly that the children in the front row had to turn around. "That's right," Hazel said. She didn't praise her further, didn't clap, didn't make a spectacle of it, because she knew exactly what would make a child like that never raise her hand a second time. She simply nodded and moved on to the next question. But when the bell rang and the children poured into the hallway, she opened the little notebook in her desk drawer and wrote down Mia's name, along with the date, along with 3 words, "the first time." That notebook had grown thick with more than 100 names. No one paid her to keep it. In the teacher's lounge, a 5th grade teacher was stirring her coffee and telling the woman beside her that her daughter had just enrolled at Ladder Up. Tuition was $420 a month. Expensive, but worth it, because the curriculum was truly excellent. "They say the man who founded it wrote the whole thing himself," she said. "Alone, from nothing." Hazel poured water into her bottle and said, "Yeah." Then she walked out. On the drive home, at the intersection near the highway entrance, the billboard was still standing there, just as it had been for the past 4 months. Grant Hollis's face enlarged to the size of an entire wall, with the words beneath it, "Learn your way." She had written that sentence in June of 2020, at 11 o'clock at night, at the kitchen table in their old apartment, after finishing the grading on 40 spelling tests. For 5 years, she had created something beautiful, then stepped back so someone else could hold the microphone. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, with no elevator, and her mother was already there waiting, the television news playing softly. Colleen Whitlock was 61 years old. The doctor called her condition early stage, and Hazel had learned that the word early in medicine didn't mean mild. It only meant the road ahead was still long. Her mother could still cook for herself, could still dress herself, but everything took 3 times as long, and she never complained, not even once. Hazel set down her bag, went straight into the bathroom, and opened the medicine cabinet. She emptied the bottle into her palm and counted. 19 pills. 3 pills a day, 6 days, with 1 pill left over. The last refill had cost $147 after insurance. Hazel's salary, after taxes and the mandatory retirement deduction, was $2,980 a month. Rent was $1,200. Her minimum student loan payment was $310, and every month there was one more payment, the one she never told her mother about, the payment on a debt that carried 2 names even though only one person had spent the money. She put the 19 pills back into the bottle, twisted the cap closed, and opened her banking app. $412. 11 days until payday. She turned off the screen. That night was Tuesday, and the rain had been falling without pause since 3 in the afternoon. Colleen was asleep. Hazel remembered that she had left her lesson plan binder in her desk drawer at school, the binder she needed for the next morning's class, and she stood at the window staring down at the rain-soaked street for exactly 40 seconds before reaching for her keys. Her car was a 14-year-old sedan, and since spring it had developed a habit of dying at red lights. The mechanic said it was the fuel pump. $800. She had told him she would come back. She retrieved the lesson plan binder, and on the way home, climbing the hill on Atwells Avenue in Federal Hill, the car coughed twice and died completely. She turned the key. Nothing. She tried again. The dashboard lights flickered on, then faded away. Her phone had 4% battery left, and the car charger had been broken since the month before. She sat perfectly still for 3 seconds, one hand still resting on the steering wheel, and then she did the only thing left to do. She pulled the parking brake, opened the door, and ran toward the nearest light along the block. A dark wooden door, about 100 feet away, the first door she saw. The door that changed everything, because if she had walked another 65 feet, she would have pushed open a different door, and her entire life would have gone in another direction. The door was heavier than she expected, and the moment it closed behind her, Hazel understood that this wasn't a place open to customers. No one stood behind the reception counter. Most of the ceiling lights had been turned off, leaving only a row of hanging lamps farther inside, and every table and chair in the room was empty, except for one long table at the center, where 6 men were seated. No one was eating, no one was speaking. All 6 faces turned toward her at the same time, in precisely the way a room turns when it has just been discussing something never meant for an outsider to hear. Water dripped from Hazel's hair onto the wooden floor. "I'm sorry," she said. "My car died outside. My phone's almost dead. I just need to make one call. 2 minutes, that's all." No one answered. The man sitting closest to the door, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair, looked toward the far end of the table instead of at her, and Hazel realized that all 6 men in the room were waiting for one person alone to speak. He sat at the head of the table farthest from her, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, and he didn't appear to be in any hurry. "There's a phone at the counter," he said. "Go ahead and use it." Hazel walked to the counter. She dialed the roadside assistance number printed on her insurance card, listened to the hold music, and then heard a recorded voice tell her that the current wait time was 70 minutes. She said thank you, hung up, and stood there calculating what 70 minutes meant, what time she would get home, whether her mother would wake up, whether she would make it to class on time the next morning. She turned around, and that was when she looked through the window. A black SUV was parked against the curb beside the building, directly in front of a metal door marked with a red sign. Hazel stared at it for 3 seconds. Then she said, loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "Whose car is that?" No one answered. She pointed through the window. "That black one. It's blocking the fire exit." Still, no one answered, and it was the silence that made her angry, because she had spent 5 years standing in rooms filled with 120 children, and she knew exactly what happened when an exit was blocked. "I'm serious," she said. "How many people are in here? If the kitchen catches fire tonight, that door is the only way out on that side. People will start pushing. The door will open about 6 inches before it hits the front bumper, and then you'll find out for yourselves what happens next. I've run fire drills regularly with my students. People don't die because of the fire. They die because they can't get the door open." The man with the salt and pepper hair stood up. His chair dragged across the wooden floor with one long, harsh scrape. "You," he said. The man at the head of the table raised one hand. He only raised it. He didn't say a word, and the man with the salt and pepper hair sat down immediately, and Hazel saw it happen, and some part of her recorded it, before she had time to understand exactly what she had just seen. The man at the head of the table pushed back his chair, stood, and took a set of keys from his coat pocket. He walked past her, went through the door, and stepped straight into the rain without taking anything to cover his head. Through the window, Hazel watched him open the SUV, pull away from the curb, and park again at the far end of the block, about 130 feet from where it had been. Then he walked back through the rain. When he pushed open the door, water streamed from the shoulders of his coat onto the floor, and none of the other 6 men dared to move. He stopped in front of her. "Anything else I'm doing wrong, teacher?" Hazel looked down at his feet. "You just left a puddle in the middle of the walkway," she said. "Someone could slip." For 2 seconds, there wasn't a sound in the entire room. Then he laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had been genuinely surprised, and found the surprise genuinely amusing. And Hazel noticed the other 5 men glancing at one another as though they had just witnessed some rare weather event. "All right," he said, reaching for a stack of napkins on the table beside him and dropping them onto the puddle. "What's wrong with your car?" "Fuel pump, I think." "How long did roadside assistance say?" 70 minutes. He looked toward the man with the salt and pepper hair and said a name. "Sal," followed by another word Hazel couldn't quite hear, and the man stood and went outside with his phone pressed to his ear. 20 minutes, he told her. "I know someone who owns a garage around the corner." "I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't ask me to move my car either." Hazel couldn't find an answer to that. She waited near the door without sitting down, and he didn't invite her to sit. When the tow truck arrived, she turned back and thanked him. "Raymond," he said. Nothing more. She nodded, gave him her own name, and stepped back into the rain. It wasn't until Hazel was sitting inside the tow truck's cab that she realized she hadn't asked for his last name, and the strange thing was that she didn't mind at all. At 7:15 the next morning, when Hazel came downstairs with her lesson plan binder tucked beneath one arm and a cup of coffee she had made at home, her 14-year-old sedan was parked in its usual place in front of the building, and a mechanic in coveralls stood beside it holding a clipboard. "Miss Whitlock?" he said. "It's finished. New fuel pump, new filter, and I replaced the car charger too, because I found that it had burned out." Hazel stared at the car. "I didn't call anyone. I know. We received the work order at 11 o'clock last night." She opened her wallet. "How much?" "It's already been paid." "Who paid it?" The mechanic looked down at his clipboard longer than necessary, then said he had only been told to deliver the car, wished her a good day, and walked toward the end of the street, where a small truck was waiting. That evening, Hazel withdrew $800 from the savings account she kept for months when something unexpected happened, placed the money in a paper envelope, and wrote across the front in the same handwriting she used when marking grades on tests, "Paid in full. H. Whitlock." She drove to Federal Hill, stopped outside the dark wooden door, and handed the envelope to the man standing inside, the one she recognized as the man who had risen from his chair the night before, the one named Sal. He accepted the envelope, looked at the words on the front, and said, "I'll pass it along." 3 days later, the envelope came back. It was waiting in her school mailbox between internal notices, the fold still untouched, the money still inside, and beneath the sentence she had written was another line in black ink, the handwriting slanted and remarkably firm. "There is nothing to pay." Hazel read those words 3 times in the teacher's lounge, then placed the envelope in her desk drawer, locked it, and told herself the matter was over. That lasted exactly 9 days. On Thursday morning of the 2nd week of October, the principal sent a letter to every teacher in the district, and Hazel read it while standing beside the copy machine. Every dollar of student lunch debt in the district had been erased. All of it, across all 7 schools, through September 30th. $40,000, paid by an anonymous donor, with no conditions and no request for recognition. Hazel knew the exact amount owed by the children in her class. She knew the names of the 4 students who carried trays of a different color from everyone else. 3 times, she had paid a student's balance out of her own pocket, and all 3 times, she hadn't told anyone. She stood in the copy room reading the letter again, and the first thing she felt wasn't gratitude. She called the district office and asked who had transferred the money. They told her they weren't permitted to disclose that information. She asked whether the payment had gone through a foundation. They said it had, through a trust company. She asked for the company's name. The person on the line hesitated, then read it aloud. And that evening, Hazel sat at the kitchen table with her old laptop and searched the Rhode Island business registration records, something anyone could access for free, and followed 3 layers of names until she reached one she had heard only once, in a room with 6 men and a puddle on the floor. She went there on Friday night. Sal opened the door and didn't seem surprised. Raymond was sitting at the long table, alone this time, with a stack of papers in front of him, and he folded them closed when she entered. $40,000, Hazel said. He didn't ask how she knew. You think I don't understand what this is? She said. The car I could almost understand, but not this. You can't buy my gratitude with money, and you certainly can't buy it by going over my head to reach my children. Raymond stood. He didn't move closer. I'm not buying you, he said. I bought lunch for 200 children. Do you want me to take it back? Hazel opened her mouth. Then she closed it. She stood there in the middle of the room and realized she had no answer, because anything she said next would amount to telling him that those 4 children should keep carrying trays of a different color. She had won harder arguments than this against people with far more impressive degrees than his. She was used to managing classrooms full of children and understood how systems functioned. She had never lost this way before. You know where I teach, she finally said. I know you argued about a fire exit with a room full of strangers, Raymond said. Finding out where you worked after that wasn't difficult. You asked someone. I did. He admitted it as simply as a man might admit checking the weather forecast, and that honesty unsettled Hazel more than a denial would have. I don't like being investigated, she said. Then you should know I stopped after that day. She looked at him for a moment. Outside, at the end of the street, a line of cars waited at a red light. I have to go, she said. My mother takes her medication at 9 o'clock. Raymond nodded and didn't try to stop her. Didn't walk her to the door. Didn't say another word. And it wasn't until Hazel was back inside her car that she realized she had willingly told him something about her life that no one had forced her to reveal. He texted her the following Wednesday afternoon from an unfamiliar number, a single line asking whether she had eaten dinner, and Hazel stared at the screen in the school parking lot longer than she wanted to admit before typing back that she hadn't. The place he chose was on a side street, with 6 plastic tables, a fluorescent sign, and a woman who owned the restaurant and asked them only one question, whether they could handle spicy food. Hazel had prepared herself for a restaurant with a waiting list. She sat down in the plastic chair and felt relieved in a way that irritated her. Do you eat here often? She asked. Since I was 19, Raymond said. He didn't explain further. The bowls of noodles arrived, steaming and spicy, and Hazel had eaten half of hers before she realized that he hadn't asked her a single question. He simply ate and waited, and it was that empty space that made her begin to talk. She told him about her mother first, because that was the easiest thing to tell. Colleen was 61, diagnosed 2 years earlier, and the hardest part wasn't the illness but the way she hid it, the way she waited until Hazel had left for work, before practicing how to rise from a chair so no one would have to see how long it took her. She told him the medication cost $147 each time after insurance, and that she had learned to count pills instead of looking at the date printed on the bottle. Then she told him about the debt, $90,000, in 2 names, signed when she was 22 in a small notary's office, with a pen that had run dry and had to be shaken twice. She hadn't spent a single dollar of it. The money had gone into the first 3 locations of a company that had had nothing to do with her for the past 2 years, except for that signature. Then she told him the part she had never told anyone, not even her lawyer, because the lawyer had asked about assets but hadn't asked about the papers in the drawer. 5 years of curriculum, every lesson unit, every worksheet, every grading rubric, every name given to every level. She had written them at by night after finishing her students' papers, and she had written them because she believed that when 2 people built something together, both of them were building it. I still have the handwritten drafts, she said. They're in a box at a rented storage unit. I pay $45 a month for that space, and I don't even know why I haven't thrown them away. Raymond set down his chopsticks. He didn't tell her she deserved better. He didn't say he was sorry. He only looked at her and asked, Why haven't you ever demanded your name back? Hazel opened her mouth to answer. She had 3 answers ready, the same ones she had used for 2 years, that it would cost money, that she didn't have time, that no one would believe a 4th grade teacher anyway. All 3 were true, And none of them was the answer. She sat there with her noodles growing cold and couldn't say anything. And Raymond didn't ask a second time, didn't fill the silence, didn't change the subject to rescue her, and perhaps that was the reason that when he offered to take her home, she didn't go to her own. The door to his house closed behind her at 11:20 on Wednesday night. The following morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and fell in a long strip across the bed. And Hazel woke before he did, and she saw 2 scars on his back, old and faded, running parallel just below his left shoulder blade, 2 straight lines no accident could have left behind. She reached out and touched one of them very lightly, and he woke. "What is this?" she said. Raymond didn't turn around at once. When he finally did, nothing in his face had changed. "I'm not in real estate, Hazel," he said. He didn't add another word, and she understood that he would answer if she asked more, that he had left that door open for her, and that stepping through it was her decision, not his. She sat up and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and a very short question formed in her mind, the question anyone in her position would have asked at that moment. A question of only 3 words. "Your last name?" She had thought it with perfect clarity. She heard it echo inside her head. Then she chose not to say it aloud, not because she had forgotten, not because she was afraid of him, but because she knew, with the same certainty with which she knew her multiplication tables, that once the answer existed inside this room, she would have to do something with it. And that morning, she wasn't ready to do anything at all. She stood and got dressed. "My first class starts at 8, she said. Raymond nodded. He didn't ask when he would see her again. He didn't offer to drive her. He remained there with one hand behind his head and said, "The key to the downstairs door is in the dish beside the stairs. Just leave it there." Hazel went downstairs, placed the key in the dish, and stepped out into the Thursday morning carrying exactly one thing she knew about the man, that his name was Raymond, and carrying one thing she had chosen not to know. The invitation arrived on Monday morning, and it came through the mail to Fox Point Elementary School, addressed to Hazel Whitlock, room 21. The office secretary carried the entire stack of mail into the teacher's lounge at 7:40, just as everyone was pouring coffee, and she placed it on top because it was the only thing in the pile that wasn't a brown envelope. Thick ivory paper, embossed lettering. Everyone knew what a wedding invitation looked like from 10 feet away. "This one's yours, Hazel," the secretary said. There were 6 people in the room. Hazel picked it up, and she immediately knew 2 things. The first was that no one in the world sent a wedding invitation to someone's workplace when they had that person's home address, and they had hers, because every year they still mailed the tax documents there. The second was that it had been timed to arrive on Monday. She opened it right there, because slipping it into her bag and taking it somewhere else to open would have been worse. Grant Michael Hollis and Sloan Merrick, October 18th. Ocean House. Watch Hill. Tucked inside was a small handwritten note in the rounded handwriting Hazel had known so well since their dormitory days, back when Sloan had been the only person in the building willing to get up at 4 in the morning and drive her to the hospital when her fever reached 104 degrees. "I hope you'll come. None of this would have begun without you." Hazel read the line without changing her expression. A colleague asked whether it was the wedding of someone she knew. She said yes, an old acquaintance, then folded the invitation and placed it in her desk drawer, the same drawer that held the envelope containing $800. She remembered the exact evening she found out. There had been no tears, no argument, no phone call she had caught him making. She had been reconciling the company credit card, something she did on the first Sunday night of every month because the outside accountant charged by the hour and they couldn't afford it, and she sorted the transactions by vendor as she always did. A hotel in Newport appeared. 2 nights. She went back 1 month. Another 2 nights. She went back again and again, her hands remaining steady on the keyboard, and by the time she stopped, the screen showed 11 consecutive months. 2 nights every month, always on the dates Grant claimed he was scouting locations in Massachusetts. She didn't call him. She didn't confront him. She sat there for another 40 minutes, exported every statement into a separate file, saved it to her own hard drive, then shut down the computer and went to sleep beside him, as she did every other night. On Monday morning, she called a divorce law office on Westminster Street and scheduled a consultation during her lunch break. She told no one for the next 19 days, not even Sloan, who texted her every day throughout those 19 days to ask whether she was all right. Now, sitting in her car in the school parking lot during lunch with the invitation resting on her lap, Hazel thought about the only thing that still bound her to that man. $90,000. The loan they had signed together. The bank had refused 3 times to remove her name because Grant had never applied to refinance it under his name alone, and every time she asked, he told her that the financial statements didn't look strong enough that year, that they should wait until after the next funding round, that she had nothing to worry about because he was making every payment on time. He was making every payment on time. That was exactly the problem. As long as he kept paying on time, she remained on his credit file like a safety net. And as long as she remained there, she couldn't borrow a single dollar for her mother. She had been thinking about it since August, when the doctor mentioned the possibility of changing Colleen's treatment plan. She called him that afternoon. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice cheerful, with people talking behind him. "You got the invitation?" "I did," Hazel said. "I'm calling about the $90,000 loan. Apply to refinance it under your own name. You've reported a profit for 2 years in a row now. The bank will approve it. I need my name removed." There was a brief silence at the other end of the line, too brief for anyone to call it hesitation. But Hazel was accustomed to listening to children who lied, and she knew what a silence like that meant. "All right," Grant said. "I can do that. The paperwork needs both our signatures, you know. It's only 3 pages. Mail it to me. I don't want to send it through the mail. It'll take 2 weeks, and I'm leaving for Boston next week." Then he said the sentence he had prepared before he ever answered the phone. "Come to the wedding. I'll bring the papers. You can sign them that day. There'll already be a notary at the hotel. 5 minutes and it's done. We can call it a decent ending to everything that came before." Hazel looked through the windshield at the children lining up to go back inside after recess. "All right," she said. "I'll come." Route 1 was jammed solid that Saturday afternoon in October, from the Wakefield turnoff onward, a long line of cars inching toward the coast, and the drive that should have taken only 50 minutes consumed exactly 90. Hazel reached Ocean House at 4:20, 20 minutes later than the time printed on the invitation, and she remained in the parking lot for another 4 minutes to check the papers in her purse once more. 3 pages of refinancing documents she had printed herself at the copy shop near the school, in case Grant forgot to bring his copy. Inside, the reception had already begun. Hazel crossed the ballroom, and the first thing she did was look for the place card table, but her name wasn't on the seating chart. A server checked the list on a tablet, apologized, then placed her at table 17, against the rear wall beside the kitchen door, with 3 distant relatives she had never met. Sloane found her before she had a chance to sit down. She wrapped both arms around Hazel, held her longer than necessary, then pulled her toward a wall where the light was flattering and called the photographer over. "Take one of the 2 of us. We've known each other for 9 years. The photographer raised the camera. Sloane slipped an arm around Hazel's waist and said in a bright voice, just loudly enough for the 3 nearest tables to hear every word, "You've kept your figure remarkably well. Not everyone is lucky enough to have money for a gym membership." A quiet laugh came from the next table. The camera flashed. Hazel held her expression steady for the precise 1/4 of a second required, then stepped away from the wall. Marilyn Hollis stopped her in the aisle between 2 rows of tables, a glass of wine in her hand, and looked her up and down the way someone might examine a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. "Oh, you came," she said. "That was kind of Grant. He still remembered to invite you." "Hello, Marilyn," Hazel said. "Which table are you at?" "Table 17. "Yes," Marilyn said. "There's plenty of room back there." Then she continued on. Hazel found Grant for the first time at 10 minutes to 5, standing near the bar with 3 men in suits. She waited until there was an opening, then stepped closer and quietly told him she had brought printed copies in case he had forgotten his. Grant put an arm around her shoulders, turned to the 3 men, and introduced her as a very important old friend, then lowered his voice once they had turned away. "Later. We're in the middle of the reception, Hazel." The second time was at 6:15. After the main course, he was moving from table to table greeting guests. Hazel stood as he passed and said only 3 words. "The paperwork, Grant." He patted the back of her chair. "I know. The notary will be here until 9. Let me finish making the rounds first." The third time was at 7, when he stepped into the hallway to take a phone call. She waited at the far end until he hung up. "Grant," she said, "I drove 90 minutes to get here for 3 pages. Sign them, and I'll leave." This time, he didn't smile. He looked at her for 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, Hazel saw something she wouldn't understand until much later. A small flicker of irritation, the irritation of a man being reminded of something he had never intended to do. "You're making tonight about you," he said. "When I say later, I mean later." Then he walked back inside. At 8 o'clock, the master of ceremonies invited the groom to say a few words. Grant took the microphone, and he was good at this. He had always been good at this. He thanked his parents, thanked the investors in attendance, told a story about the day he opened his first location with 2 plastic tables and an old printer, and the entire room laughed exactly where he wanted them to laugh. Then he lowered his voice. "And I want to thank the woman who believed in me from the very beginning," he said. "The woman who stood beside me when there was nothing." He turned toward Sloane. He kissed her. 200 people applauded. Hazel stood at the edge of the dance floor, a little more than a dozen paces from the platform, still holding the purse with the 3 pages inside. And she thought about the 90 minutes on Route 1, about the 19 pills in the medicine cabinet, about how she still had to stand before 22 children on Monday morning. She stepped forward. She didn't seize the microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked to within 3 paces of him and said, loudly enough for him to hear, "Grant, 3 pages, now." He looked at her, then at the 200 faces turned toward them, and he made his choice. He laughed, tilted the microphone toward her, and said loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, "If you think you can find someone better than me, sweetheart, go ahead. Go find him." The ballroom erupted in laughter. Not just a few people, 200 people, all at once, the sound crashing into her from every direction like water breaking over a levee. And somewhere to Hazel's left, a phone rose into the air and began recording. She stood motionless in the middle of the dance floor, the wave of laughter still echoing off the high ceilings. The room had barely caught its breath when the heavy doors behind her swung open. A tall figure moved through the paralyzed crowd without a trace of hesitation. Before Grant could even pull the microphone back, that same warm, steady hand Hazel recognized from the rain settled firmly on her shoulder. The calm voice that followed didn't just break the silence, it tore through the ballroom like thunder, announcing a name that made every smile instantly turn to ice. Then someone touched her elbow. Bree Hollis, Grant's 23-year-old sister, the only person in the entire room who wasn't laughing, quietly placed a glass of water in her hand and didn't say a word. The tray fell first. A server carrying a stack of clean glasses across the far end of the room stopped in the middle of a step, and the entire stack crashed onto the tile floor in a long, shattering sound that made someone at the front table cry out. No one turned to look at the broken glass. At table 3, a silver-haired man in a gray suit shot to his feet so quickly that he knocked over the wine glass of the person beside him, and he didn't sit down again. He remained standing with one hand on the back of his chair, staring toward the platform. Marilyn Hollis lowered her glass to the table with both hands, very slowly, as though she were setting down something fragile and no longer trusted her own grip. Sloane clutched Grant's arm. Her fingers tightened so hard that her knuckles turned white against the black sleeve of his suit. And she wasn't looking at Hazel. She was looking at her husband, and there was a question on her face that she hadn't yet dared to ask aloud. Grant stood motionless with the microphone still tilted in his hand. The blood drained from his face in a way Hazel had never seen throughout all their time together. Not even the night the first location had nearly lost its lease. Not even the day he signed the divorce papers. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was afraid, and that fear came too quickly. Far more quickly than a man could be frightened merely because someone had ruined his speech, and Hazel saw it clearly even though she didn't yet understand why. The name that had just been spoken wasn't new to Grant Hollis. He had read it somewhere before, in some file, and he was trying to remember exactly where. And Hazel watched him searching his memory in the middle of 200 people. Yet the most stunned person in the ballroom was Hazel herself. For the past 3 weeks, the man standing beside her had possessed only one name: Raymond. She had eaten noodles with him in a restaurant with 6 plastic tables. She had told him about the 19 pills in the medicine cabinet and the $90,000 carried under 2 names. She had slept in his house, and she had chosen not to ask for the rest of that name. And now the rest of it had been spoken aloud in a ballroom in Watch Hill before 200 witnesses, and she heard it at the same moment as everyone else. Marchetti. She knew that name. Everyone who grew up in Rhode Island knew it in the way people knew the name of a river running through their city. No one had to teach them. They didn't have to read it anywhere. It was simply there. Hazel didn't move. She felt a cold current travel down her spine, and she knew exactly what it was. It was the price of not asking, and she was paying it here, at the very same moment she was being rescued. Raymond said nothing more. He didn't look at Grant a second time. He merely inclined his head toward the door, and Hazel followed because the only other choice was to remain standing in the middle of 200 people who had stopped breathing, and no one in that ballroom had any intention of stopping them. The silver-haired man at table 3 was still standing when they passed him. Outside on the steps, the sea wind struck sideways, and Hazel walked 4 paces before stopping. "Where did you park?" The car was waiting at the end of the drive, and Sal stood beside the rear door. He opened it for her without saying a word. They had traveled about 1.5 miles along the dark coastal road before Hazel spoke. "You just lied to 200 people." "I didn't lie," Raymond said. "I only said it early. Don't." She turned fully toward him. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm not a negotiating table." He said nothing. "You knew why I went there," she said. "I told you. 3 pages. That was all. I didn't ask you to come. I didn't ask anyone to come. And you walked in," said one sentence. "And by tomorrow morning this entire state will know whose wife the 4th-grade teacher at Fox Point is." She heard her voice break on the final word, and she hated it. "No one asked whether I wanted that." Raymond kept his eyes on the road ahead. Then he turned on the signal, pulled into an empty patch of ground beside the road, and shut off the engine. There were no lights along that stretch, only the sound of waves somewhere below the cliffs. He sat still for several seconds, both hands resting on the steering wheel. "You're right," he said. "No one asked you." Hazel hadn't expected him to say that. She had prepared herself for a justification, for him to say he had done it for her, for anything she could push back against. "What were you thinking when you walked in there?" she asked. "I was thinking that everything has a price," Raymond said. "And I was thinking you were paying one you didn't owe anyone. What about the price you just made me pay?" He turned and looked at her. "I don't know yet," he said. "But it'll come." By noon on Sunday, the phone video recorded from the table on the left had been viewed more than 200,000 times. And by Monday evening, no one in the teacher's lounge was asking Hazel about her weekend anymore. On Tuesday, an express delivery envelope arrived at the school. Inside was a letter from the law firm representing Ladder Up, 3 pages long and flawlessly polite, citing a non-disclosure agreement Hazel had signed in 2021 when the company expanded beyond the state. The letter reminded her that any public statement concerning the company's operations, products, or leadership fell within the scope of that agreement, that the events of Saturday night had damaged the brand's reputation during a sensitive period, and that their client reserved every right available under the law. There wasn't a single word about the 3 pages of refinancing documents. Hazel read the entire letter twice, folded it, and that evening pulled the plastic box containing her divorce records from beneath the bed. She hadn't opened it since moving into the apartment. Inside was everything her lawyer had copied 2 years earlier, arranged in the order the lawyer had numbered it: asset records, tax documents, property leases, and copies of the company's articles of incorporation. She went through each file one at a time, without rushing, searching for anything that mentioned the non-disclosure agreement so she could understand exactly how far it bound her. She found it in the 4th file. And directly behind it, fastened beneath the same staple, was a document she had never seen in her life. 4 pages. The title stated plainly that it was an agreement transferring all intellectual property rights related to teaching materials, curriculum, methods, and every derivative product from the assigner to the company. The date on the first page was March 14th, 2022. The assigner was Hazel Whitlock. She turned to the final page. Her signature was there on the line, with the date written by hand beside it. Hazel didn't panic. She sat motionless on the bedroom floor with the 4 pages resting across her lap, and she did what she always did when a child handed her a math problem with an answer that was wrong in some strangely specific way. She went back and checked every step. March of 2022. She searched her memory by milestones. That month, her mother had spent 4 days in the hospital for a biopsy. That month, Hazel had missed 2 days of school and had written substitute lesson plans. She remembered that month clearly, and she knew with certainty that she had never signed any document with the word assignment in its title. Not because she had forgotten, but because it was the very thing she had refused to sign. She remembered the conversation itself. Grant had raised the subject one winter evening before that, saying the consultants had advised them to place all the intellectual property under a single owner, so the fundraising records would be cleaner, and she had said no. She had said no twice, the second time in the kitchen, and she even remembered the exact words she had used, that if everything went under one owner, her name would disappear from everything she had written. He had told her all right. It didn't matter. It was a small thing. Then he had never mentioned it again. Hazel stood, carried the 4 pages to the dining table, and switched on the desk lamp she used when grading papers at night. She took a blank sheet from her printer paper and picked up a ballpoint pen. She wrote her name, Hazel Whitlock. Then she wrote it a second time on the line below, then a third. She didn't try to make it beautiful, and she didn't try to make it match. She simply wrote the way her hand naturally wrote every day, 30 times a day, on attendance sheets, tests, permission forms, for 5 years. Then she placed the blank sheet beside the 4th page of the assignment agreement and pulled the lamp closer. The H matched. It matched almost perfectly, the downward stroke leaning slightly to the right, the small loop at the bottom she had made since 3rd grade. Someone had sat in front of a sample of her signature and practiced it. Someone had taken time to do this rather than scrawling it in 3 seconds. But the W didn't match. In all 3 signatures written by her own hand, the final stroke of the W dipped downward, then curved back toward the left before joining the next letter. On the 4th page, the final stroke of the W rose straight upward. Hazel studied the 2 versions side by side beneath the light for a length of time she couldn't measure. Her face didn't grow hot. Her hands didn't tremble. She felt something entirely opposite, a stillness spreading from her chest to the tips of her fingers, the stillness of a person who had finally seen the complete structure of a problem she had spent 2 years viewing only in scattered pieces. She didn't call anyone. She picked up her phone and photographed all 4 pages, then photographed the final page 3 separate times beneath 3 different angles of light, and finally photographed the blank sheet bearing the 3 signatures she had written herself. Afterward, she placed the 4 pages inside a rigid envelope, wrote the date across the front, and sat back down in the chair. The desk lamp remained on. Outside, it was already well past midnight. Hazel looked at the envelope and thought, with perfect clarity, that what she needed now was someone who knew how to read numbers, and she knew exactly who that person was. That man picked Mia Kessler up at the school gate at 4 o'clock every afternoon, always standing in the same place to the left of the flagpole. And at the first parent-teacher conference of the year, he was the only person who brought a notebook and wrote down what Hazel said. He had once given her an old business card when she asked what he did for a living, a yellowed card bearing the words forensic accountant, followed by 2 initials after his name, Walter Kessler, 63 years old. Hazel called him on Thursday evening, and he arranged to meet her at 8 o'clock Saturday morning in a coffee shop on Wickenden Street, and he was already seated there when she arrived. She placed the rigid envelope on the table and told him everything in 7 minutes, without adding a single emotional detail, because she had the feeling he wouldn't need any of them. Walter opened the envelope, removed the 4 pages, and began reading from the first page without skipping ahead to the last. It took him 11 minutes. Then he turned to the signature page, placed the blank sheet bearing her 3 signatures beside it, and studied the 2 for about 30 seconds. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't ask whether she was all right. He pushed his glasses up onto his forehead and asked, "Do you have the original from June of 2020? The original what? The first agreement. The one from when you and he started the company. The one bearing both your signatures, before there were any investors." "Yes," Hazel said. "Somewhere." "Where is somewhere?" "In a box at a storage facility on Allen's Avenue. I think. I haven't opened it in 3 years." Walter nodded and began arranging the 4 pages in precisely the order they had been in before. "This document," he said, tapping lightly on the 4th page, "only means something if it replaces something that came before it. If nothing came before it, then this is the entire story. But if something did, then this is only the 2nd chapter of a story whose first chapter was written by you. What about the W?" "The W is for a handwriting examiner. Not for me. I read numbers, not pen strokes." He handed the envelope back to her. "Find the box. Then give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to do what?" "To read the things people make public that no one ever bothers to read," Walter said. He stood, paid for both coffees, and left without telling her to keep quiet, without warning her to be careful, without saying another word. On Sunday afternoon, Hazel drove to the storage facility on Allen's Avenue, opened the combination lock on Unit 112, and raised the metal door. Inside were 7 plastic bins and 3 cardboard boxes. She dragged all of them into the aisle and opened them one at a time. The first held winter clothes. The second held old textbooks. The third held photographs, and she closed it again after 4 seconds. The fourth contained her handwritten drafts, exactly as she had described them to Raymond. Hundreds of pages of graph paper covered in her own handwriting, including pages she had crossed out and rewritten 3 times. She went through that entire box 1 page at a time. It took 1 hour and 40 minutes, and there was no contract inside. The remaining 6 containers held nothing either. By 7 o'clock that evening, when the storage manager walked past and reminded her that the facility closed at 8, Hazel was sitting on the concrete floor among 10 open containers, her hands covered in dust, and she realized something so simple that she should have thought of it from the beginning. She hadn't been the one who cleared out the old office when the company moved its headquarters in 2022. That evening, she told Raymond everything at the kitchen table in her apartment, with her mother's bedroom door closed. He listened to the end without interrupting, and when she finished, he remained silent for a moment before saying, "I can solve this in 10 minutes. Hazel looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means I make 2 phone calls tonight," Raymond said. "No one gets hurt. No one goes near him. But tomorrow morning, he'll call you himself. He'll cry. And he'll sign anything you put in front of him, including your 3 pages, including a statement admitting that the assignment document is fraudulent." He said it without raising his voice, without making it sound like a favor, like a man giving an estimate for repairing a roof. Hazel looked down at her hands, still dusty from the storage unit. She thought about the 19 pills, the $412, the 90 minutes on Route 1, and she understood that he was telling the truth, that it would happen exactly as he had described, and that by noon the next day, her life could already be entirely different. "No," she said. Raymond didn't respond. "If you do that," Hazel said, "then for the rest of my life, I'll never know whether I could have done it myself. For 5 years, I created something that someone else stood up and took credit for. I don't need another person standing up in my place now, even when that person is standing on my side." She raised her eyes and looked directly at him. "I need this to be mine. Do you understand?" Raymond looked at her for a very long time, longer than was comfortable, and in that silence, Hazel didn't take back a single word. Then he nodded. The complaint was filed the following Tuesday, and it didn't come from Grant. It came from a parent Hazel had never met, someone whose child was in 5th grade at another school in the district, and the complaint alleged that a tenured teacher had an undisclosed financial relationship with an anonymous donor who had just transferred $40,000 into the lunch fund of that same school district. The complaint gave her full name, included specific dates, and attached a link to the video recorded in Watch Hill. Hazel was summoned to the district office on Thursday morning. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. They told her no conclusions had been reached, that this was a mandatory procedure whenever a complaint involved a possible conflict of interest, and that she should regard it as a formality. Then they handed her a document placing her on unpaid administrative leave until the investigation was complete. On her way out, she passed a conference room with glass walls, and she saw a silver-haired man in a gray suit sitting inside with 2 other people. She had seen him shoot to his feet from table 3 in the Ocean House ballroom. He was a member of the school board. His name was also on LadderUp's list of investors. No one told her that. She found it herself that evening, and it took 20 minutes. 2 days later, her summer teaching contract was canceled on the grounds that personnel assignments were under review while an investigation remained open. Her contract for the after-school program, which brought her $680 a month, was canceled the same day with the same single line of explanation. Then, on the 16th, a letter arrived from Human Resources informing her that because she was no longer in paid status, her health coverage under the district's group plan would end at the close of the month, and that she had the right to continue coverage through Cobra. Hazel read the amount on the premium schedule 3 times, $1,241 a month. The district had previously paid most of it, while her share had been only $194, and she had never thought about the rest, just as people never thought about the weight of the bridge they crossed every morning. Her mother was 61 years old, 4 more years before she would qualify for Medicare. 4 years meant 48 months. And Hazel sat at the kitchen table and worked out the multiplication on paper, even though she knew the answer before her pen touched the page. On the 18th, she drove to a pawn shop on Broad Street and placed the old wedding ring she had kept untouched in a drawer for 2 years on the counter. The man behind the counter examined it beneath a jeweler's loupe for 3 minutes. 18-karat gold, he said. A half-carat stone with average clarity. And the market value of things like this never came close to what someone had originally paid. He offered her $680. Hazel accepted without bargaining. And as she walked out, she realized the amount was exactly the same as the monthly income she had just lost from the after-school program. Her account balance after depositing the money was $2,039. The first COBRA premium had to be paid by the 31st. Rent of $1,200 was due on the 1st. Her mother had 11 days of medication remaining, and once the insurance ended, the refill would no longer cost $147. It would cost $412. Hazel had called the pharmacy to ask, and someone had read the amount to her in a perfectly ordinary voice. On Friday afternoon, the 20th, Hazel parked outside the pharmacy on Hope Street and remained in her car for 10 minutes before getting out because she was trying to decide whether to buy enough medication for half a month or for the entire month. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Walter Kessler's number, accompanied by a photograph of a sheet of graph paper. She asked me to send this to you. Hazel opened the image. The handwriting belonged to a child, written in pencil, the letters uneven and leaning, with one word erased and written again. Dear Miss Whitlock, today I did the fractions problem. The hardest one. Miss Sanders said I got every answer right. Please come back soon. Hazel read the 4 lines. Then she read them again. Then she placed the phone face down on her lap and sat perfectly still. She didn't cry. She sat inside her 14-year-old car in the pharmacy parking lot, both hands resting on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the blue neon sign ahead of her, and she remained that way long enough for the woman who parked beside her to glance over twice. There was no grand thought in Hazel's mind. Only one short sequence repeating itself again and again. 22 children. One child who had raised her hand for the first time after an entire month. And no one in the district, no one inside that glass-walled conference room, had to explain to that little girl why her teacher wasn't coming back. At 7 o'clock that evening, Hazel walked into the pharmacy and bought 15 days of medication. She went home, placed the bottle on the kitchen table, and told her mother that the school was giving her some time away to develop a new program. Colleen looked at her daughter a little longer than usual, then said, "All right," and asked nothing more. Sloane texted on Monday night, and she didn't use the old number Hazel had blocked 2 years earlier. There were only 2 lines. "I know you've been suspended from work. Give me 20 minutes. You can choose any place where you feel safe." Hazel chose a breakfast diner on Elmwood Avenue, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and unlimited coffee refills, and she arrived 20 minutes early so she could take a table with her back against the wall. Sloane arrived on time, alone, and placed a canvas bag on the chair beside her before sitting down. They didn't embrace. "Thank you for coming," Sloane said. She poured coffee for both of them, an old habit from their dormitory days, and Hazel let her do it. "I only have 15 minutes, Hazel said. Sloane nodded. She sat silently for a while with both hands wrapped around her cup, and then she said something Hazel hadn't been prepared to hear. "I think about you every day." She didn't say it theatrically. Her voice was quiet and slightly unsteady. "I still remember that night when your fever reached 104 degrees. I remember sitting in the hospital hallway wearing slippers and thinking that if this girl dies, I won't have anyone left. I still think about that. I don't know what I've become anymore." Hazel said nothing. "But I came here to do something else," Sloane said, pulling the canvas bag onto her lap. She took out a thick envelope and a stapled packet of papers. $25,000. Cash. It won't pass through any account. And this. She pushed the packet across the table. "You sign this, stating that you have no dispute with the company, that you won't make any further public statements about it, and that you won't pursue any claim involving the teaching materials. In return, the lawyers withdraw their warning letter, and the complaint with the school district will be withdrawn this week." Hazel looked at the envelope. She thought about $1,241 a month, about 48 months, about the 15 days of medication, sitting on the kitchen table. $25,000 was 20 months of insurance. It was 9 months without having to think. "You know that complaint will be withdrawn," she said. "I heard something." "From whom?" Sloane didn't answer. Hazel pushed the packet back across the table. "No, Hazel. You're asking me to sign a paper saying I have no dispute over the teaching materials," Hazel said. "You sat beside me in that kitchen when I wrote Lesson Unit 7. You even suggested the name. You know exactly why this document exists. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to buy a signature. Another signature. Sloane set her cup down a little too hard. Do you think I enjoy sitting here? Do you think I sleep well at night? What do you think I've gained from any of this? I think you just married him. Sloane stopped. Her face reddened, and when she spoke again, her voice had broken through the professional shell she had worn into the diner. Do you think Grant came up with any of it? Do you think he sat alone and built that company? He doesn't even know where the major expansion capital came from. Then she fell silent. It wasn't the kind of pause someone made to catch her breath. It was the silence of a person who had missed a step in the dark and found herself frozen in midair. Sloane closed her mouth, and Hazel watched all the color drain from her face, exactly as it had drained from Grant's face in the ballroom at Watch Hill. What did you just say? Hazel asked. Her voice was perfectly ordinary. Nothing. I was rambling. Where did the money come from, Sloane? I told you. I was rambling. You said he doesn't know where the money came from. So who does? Sloane reached for the canvas bag. She snatched back the envelope, shoved the packet of papers inside, and her movements were no longer neat. She dropped the staple clip onto the floor and didn't pick it up. I have to go. Sloane, you go ahead and keep your dignity, Sloane said as she stood, and by the final sentence, there was no anger left in her voice, only exhaustion and something that sounded very much like fear. I hope you never have to understand why I came here. Then she walked out the door. Hazel remained in the diner for another 90 seconds without moving, her hand still resting on the table, and she allowed every word of that sentence to settle in the exact order in which it had been spoken. He doesn't even know where the money came from. She had spent 2 years believing this was the story of a man stealing credit from his wife. She had spent 2 weeks believing it was the story of a forged signature, but the woman who had just left the diner hadn't been afraid of Hazel. She was afraid of something else, and she had accidentally revealed that it existed. Hazel paid for both cups of coffee, walked into the parking lot, sat behind the wheel, and called Walter Kessler immediately. He answered on the 3rd ring. Are you still searching the records? She asked. I am. Don't just investigate Grant's company anymore, Hazel said. Find out where the original investment money came from, every last dollar. Walter called her 9 days later, at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, and said only one thing, that she should come to his house and bring the rigid envelope. His home was a 2-story house in Elmhurst with a long dining table that had no room left for a coffee cup that morning. He had covered the entire surface with papers arranged in 6 rows, each row marked by a note at the top. Mia wasn't home, he said. She was spending the whole day at a friend's birthday party, and he told Hazel that before she had a chance to ask. Then he lowered his glasses over his eyes and began. You asked where the original investment money came from, he said. Here. He pointed to the first row. A company called Braxton Harrow Capital, registered in Delaware, had opened an operating account in Rhode Island in February of 2022. In April of that same year, it had invested $1,800,000 in Ladderup as seed capital. 4 weeks before the date on your assignment agreement, Walter said. Pay attention to that timeline. Hazel did. Then, in March of 2024, it bought more. Not from Grant, from 2 minority shareholders. After that transaction, it owned 41%. He moved to the 2nd row, and this is what made it take me 9 days instead of 3. It was a revenue statement covering 11 Ladderup locations over 3 years. Walter placed one finger on the column at the far right. 38% of tuition payments were made in cash. 38%. At a chain of tutoring centers where most of the parents are office workers with credit cards. He turned to the next page. And here is the second part. 9 locations appear on the list of businesses receiving federal subsidies for low-income students. That money was transferred directly from the government budget into the company's account according to the number of enrolled students. Hazel looked at the 2 pages. Explain it to me as though I were your student. Walter removed his glasses. All right. Someone has money whose origin they can't disclose. They bring it to a business that collects cash every day, mix it into legitimate revenue, and record it as tuition, paid by students who don't exist, or by students who attended fewer sessions than the records claim. From the moment it appears in the revenue statements of a legitimate education company, it becomes clean money. The federal subsidy is an added reward because it makes the books look even more credible, and because it is real money flowing in from the government. No one thinks to scrutinize a company that is receiving government funds. He put his glasses back on. To put it simply, Your former husband's company isn't an education company with financial problems. It is a money laundering machine, and the education business is the cover. Hazel sat down. She didn't feel dizzy or sick. She only had the strange sensation that the room had suddenly become quieter than it should have been. But there is still one thing I don't understand, she said. How many cash businesses are there in this state? Car washes, restaurants, gyms. Why this one? Walter studied her for a moment, then turned to the fourth row of papers. It was a copy of a due diligence report prepared for Braxton Harrow by an outside consulting firm, dated January of 2022, 3 months before the money was invested. He pointed to a passage he had circled in pencil. Read it. Hazel read. The passage stated that the investment target's greatest strength wasn't its leadership or its locations, but its proprietary teaching materials, developed by a practicing educator, possessing genuine pedagogical depth, and capable of withstanding academic review and quality assessment by any regulatory body. It said this was the factor that gave the company far greater credibility than comparable businesses in the same industry. Hazel read it a second time. They didn't choose Grant, she said. No, Walter said. They chose what was inside the company. People don't buy an empty shell, because an empty shell collapses during the first audit. They buy a shell with something real inside it. He said nothing more. He allowed her to travel the rest of the distance on her own. 5 years. Every lesson unit written at 11 o'clock at night after she had finished grading 40 spelling tests. The grading rubric she had revised 4 times until a 4th grader could look at it and understand exactly where they stood. The method she had invented using a cold pizza. All of it had been placed in a due diligence report as a line under strengths, and it was the reason money of unknown origin had chosen this particular place to be laundered. She was the clean outer layer. She sat silently for about 15 seconds. Then she asked, "The assignment agreement came 4 weeks after the money went in." "Yes," Walter said. "They paid for an asset the company didn't own. 4 weeks later, the company owned it. Draw your own conclusion. Who is behind Braxton Harrow?" Walter pulled the final row of papers closer. This was the part that took the most time. It is buried beneath 3 layers. The Delaware company is owned by another Delaware company, and that company is controlled by a trust in Nevada. But the original Rhode Island registration from 2022 still exists, and people weren't as careful then as they are now. The first filing includes the name of one managing member. He turned the page around, pushed it toward her, and placed one finger on a line. Hazel leaned down and looked. Vincent Marchetti. Hazel drove straight from Walter's house to Federal Hill with the files on the seat beside her, and she didn't call ahead. Sal opened the door, looked at the stack of papers in her hands, then walked inside without saying anything. Raymond came out about a minute later. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She placed the document bearing the name Vincent Marchetti in front of him, laid the due diligence report on top of it, then placed the cash revenue statements above that, and she explained everything in 6 minutes, following the exact order in which Walter had presented it to her, without adding a single word of her own. When she finished, Raymond didn't ask her a single question. He pulled the first page closer and looked at the name printed there. He stared at it for a very long time. Hazel had seen him silent many times during the past 6 weeks, but this was an entirely different kind of silence. The silence of a man rearranging the past 3 years inside his mind and discovering gaps he had never thought to question before. "You know that name," she said. "He's my older cousin," Raymond said. Then he stood, took the entire file, and told Sal to get the car ready. He didn't tell Hazel where he intended to go, and she didn't ask, because in that moment, she understood something. This was the first time in 3 weeks she had seen him react like a man who had just discovered that someone had outmaneuvered him inside his own house. The warehouse stood in row 7 at the Port of Providence, a long concrete block with a sheet metal roof and a small glass-walled office in the eastern corner. Vincent Marchetti was sitting there when Raymond entered, 44 years old, his coat draped over the back of his chair, a paper cup of cold coffee in front of him. Raymond told the 2 men standing near the door to leave. They left. He pulled out a chair, sat across from Vincent, placed the file on the wooden desk, and pushed it toward him. Vincent glanced down, leaned back, and gave a quiet laugh. "Your schoolteacher found all this?" he said. "Just answer my question. You haven't asked one yet." "Braxton Harrow," Raymond said. Vincent lifted the coffee cup, realized it was cold, and set it back down. The money has been moving steadily for 3 years, he said. No one has been arrested. No one has been hurt. Not one family name appears on any document except a filing from 2022 that even I had forgotten existed. Clean up your own books at the docks before you come talking to me. I'm asking you one question, Raymond said. Do you know what kept that company running? Me. A 4th grade teacher's curriculum, Raymond said. They evaluated it before you invested a single dollar. It says so plainly in the due diligence report. You didn't buy that company. You bought her name so it could stand in front of your money. Vincent shrugged. So what? The girl didn't lose anything. She was still teaching. She lost her job last week. Because of you, Vincent said immediately, and this time his voice turned sharp. Because you walked into a wedding in Watch Hill in front of 200 people and said our family name out loud. I kept that name off every document for 3 years, and you ruined it in 4 seconds. For what? So some girl wouldn't have to feel humiliated at a wedding reception. He leaned forward. You sat in that chair and went soft, Raymond. If your father were still alive, he never would have let you take it. And now you're going around marrying a schoolteacher. Raymond didn't change his posture. She asked me a question that no one in this family has dared ask me in 20 years, he said. And you used her name to launder money. Vincent was silent for 3 seconds. Then he said, very calmly, and what did you use? Raymond didn't answer. He stood, left the file where it was on the desk, and walked out. Vincent didn't call after him. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night when Raymond reached home, and Gianna was waiting in the study with an open leather briefcase resting on her lap. She was 34, his younger sister, and the only person in the family permitted to wait for him in that room. Sal told me, she said. You went to see Vincent alone without telling anyone because of a stack of papers printed by a retired accountant. The papers were right. I'm not arguing about whether they were right. Gianna closed the briefcase. Listen to me. If Braxton Harrow comes apart, it won't come apart alone. It'll pull the registration records with it, then the bank accounts, then the 3 companies at the docks that carry your name on their documents. Do you know how long it took me to build a wall between the transportation business and everything else? 4 years. 4 years, and you're about to knock it down. I know. Then why? Raymond stood at the window and didn't turn around. You're putting the entire family on the table for one woman, Gianna said. I'm putting Vincent on the table, he said. She's only the person who taught me how to tell the difference. Gianna stood, picked up her briefcase, and paused when she reached the door. I hope you truly can tell the difference, she said. Raymond remained at the window for a long time after she left, and the question that haunted him throughout the night wasn't his sister's. The woman was waiting in the parking lot of Fox Point Elementary School on Tuesday afternoon beside Hazel's car, and she held out her badge before Hazel had a chance to ask who she was. Dana Coyle, 42 years old, Financial Crimes Unit. You don't teach here anymore, Hazel said. I know. I waited here because I guessed you still came by. She had guessed correctly. Hazel still stopped by on Tuesday afternoons to check her mailbox, even though nothing had appeared in it for 3 weeks. We opened a file on Braxton Harrow Capital 14 months ago, Coyle said. Long before you. Our problem isn't a lack of suspicion. Our problem is 3 layers of companies in Delaware and Nevada, and no one on the inside willing to speak. Then what do you need from me? We need someone they'll speak honestly to, Coyle said. You're the only person they have a reason to approach. They've already approached you. $25,000 in cash at a breakfast diner on Elmwood Avenue. Hazel didn't ask how she knew. Our offer has 3 parts, Coyle said. First, you wear a recording device during meetings we approve in advance. Rhode Island requires the consent of only one party, so your recordings will be legal and admissible. Second, you receive complete immunity from liability, including anything connected to the assignment document from 2022, because on paper, your name is attached to an asset being used to support dirty money. Third, she paused. The third part is the one I needed authorization to include. If this case succeeds, you'll have the right to disclose your full role as the author of that curriculum. No non-disclosure agreement will be able to silence you anymore. Hazel stood motionless beside the car door. There's a part you haven't said, she said. Coyle nodded. You understand who this is going to touch. I understand. I need you to understand it in words, not as a feeling, Coyle said. The name on the filing from 2022 isn't merely an investor, and the name the entire state heard in the Watch Hill video carries the same last name. Hazel went home and sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes. Then she called Raymond and told him to come over. She told him everything from the beginning, hiding no detail, including Coyle's final sentence, including the fact that she had spoken his family name aloud. When Hazel finished, she sat and waited. She had prepared herself for him to say no. She had prepared herself for him to say there was another way, to let him handle it, that she didn't understand what she was stepping into. Raymond remained silent for exactly 3 seconds. "Do it," he said. Hazel looked up. "You know I'll be wearing a wire to get your cousin to talk." "I know, and you're still telling me to do it." "I'm telling you to do it for 2 reasons," Raymond said. "You should hear both of them. Don't listen only to the noble one." He rested one hand on the table. "The first reason is that he ran this outside every channel, without telling anyone, and for 3 years he put my family name on documents without my knowledge. If this comes apart my way, my entire family pays the price. If it comes apart your way, he pays alone. I'm not going to pretend I haven't considered that." "And the second reason?" He looked at her. "The second reason is that you told me not to stand in your place anymore." "I heard you." Hazel said nothing. She had imagined many versions of this conversation, and none of them had been anything like this. At 9 o'clock that night, after Raymond had left, someone knocked on the door. Hazel looked through the peephole and saw Grant Hollis standing in the hallway without a coat, his hair wet from the rain outside. She opened the door but didn't step aside. "I'm not coming in," he said immediately. "Just give me 3 minutes." He spoke quickly, with no order to any of it. He said that if the funding round next month failed, everything would collapse, that he had signed things he hadn't read carefully at the time, that someone had called him the week before, and it hadn't sounded like any phone call he had ever received in his life. Then he began to cry. It wasn't theatrical. His shoulders shook, and he had to raise one hand to his face, and Hazel stood there watching the man she had slept beside for 9 years genuinely weep in the hallway of her 3rd-floor apartment. "I still love you," Grant said. "I know you don't believe me, but I'm afraid, Hazel. I'm so afraid I can't sleep. Come back and help me just once. All you have to do is sign that paper. All you have to do is tell them there's no dispute, and everything can stop." Hazel waited for something to rise inside her chest. She waited for anger. She waited for pain. She waited for at least a trace of pity. Nothing came. She stood there and felt completely empty inside, flat and still as a table that had just been wiped clean. And it was that emptiness that made her understand that this had ended a long time ago without her knowing it. "You're not afraid of losing me," she said. "You're afraid of losing what I wrote." Grant looked up. He didn't deny it. Hazel studied him for 1 more second, then closed the door and slid the lock into place. She signed the papers with Coyle's office on Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon, the envelope appeared. It didn't come through the mail. It was lying beneath the door of her 3rd-floor apartment. A large white paper envelope, with no stamp, no address, and no recipient's name, and Hazel stared at it on the wooden floor for about 5 seconds before bending down to pick it up. Inside was a photograph printed on ordinary paper, 8 by 10 inches. It had been taken from across the street at a slight angle, through the space between 2 parked cars. The photograph showed the gates of Fox Point Elementary School on a sunny afternoon, the white stripes of the crosswalk, and Hazel walking in the middle of it, her briefcase in her left hand, and Mia Kessler's hand in her right. The little girl was looking up at her, saying something. Hazel remembered that afternoon. It was the day Mia's grandfather had been caught in traffic and called to ask Hazel to walk the child across the street to wait at the bookstore. And it had happened 5 weeks earlier, before the wedding reception. There were no words inside the envelope. Nothing was written on the back of the photograph. Hazel stood in the entrance of the apartment holding it and didn't move for about 30 seconds. Then she went into the kitchen, closed the kitchen door very softly because her mother was asleep in the bedroom, and sat down on the floor with her back against the lower cabinets. She had sat in the pharmacy parking lot and hadn't cried. She had stood in the middle of 200 people laughing at Watch Hill and hadn't cried. She had looked at her forged signature beneath the desk lamp after midnight and hadn't cried. But now, sitting on the cold tile with the photograph face down across her lap, Hazel Whitlock cried, and she cried with both hands pressed over her mouth so she wouldn't make a sound, and she cried for a very long time. She called Raymond at 7:10. First, she called Walter Kessler to warn him immediately so he could secure Mia's safety. Then she spoke to Raymond. She didn't explain over the phone. She only told him to send someone. And 40 minutes later, Sal Renna knocked on the door. He took the photograph, looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then folded it and slipped it inside his coat. "Can your mother travel?" he asked. "She needs 15 minutes. I'll wait downstairs in the car." He carried Colleen's bag down 3 flights of stairs, moving at her pace, supporting her by the elbow at every landing, and he didn't say a single word about how long it took her. Raymond's house stood at the end of an unlit road, and an older woman came out to meet them and prepared a room for Colleen on the ground floor because she couldn't climb the stairs. By 11 o'clock that night, after her mother had fallen asleep, Hazel was sitting on the back steps when Raymond came out and sat beside her. "I'm not going to ask whether you're all right," he said. "Good." They sat in silence for a while. "I want to ask you something," Hazel said. "Ask. How old were you when you started?" Raymond didn't answer immediately. 17, he said. "I didn't ask for it. That's the part people always misunderstand. They think there was some moment when I stepped inside, nodded, and made a choice. There wasn't. My father died in February of the year I turned 17, and by March, 3 men over 50 were sitting in my mother's kitchen, calling me by the name they had once called him. I hadn't even finished my 11th grade exams. Could you have said no?" I thought about it. I thought about it for 6 months. He looked out into the darkness before them. But Gianna was 14 then, and my mother didn't know which accounts were which. If I said no, that chair wouldn't disappear. It would only pass to someone else, and that someone else would have no reason to treat my family kindly. He paused. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I've had 20 years to walk away, and I didn't. I built more onto it. There are things I've done that I won't tell you, not because I'm hiding them, but because you don't need to carry them." Hazel looked down at her hands. "So have I," she said. "Not in the same way as you, but I have. Since I was 22, I've been the name beneath someone else's signature. Then I was the founder's wife. Then I was the teacher in the video online. Then last week, I learned that I was the clean cover for the dirty money of a man I had never even met. I've never been the thing I wrote for myself." Raymond nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "That, I understand." They sat quietly for a long while. "I'm not a good man, Hazel," he said. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I am, but I know exactly who I am, and I know the price of everything I have. Grant, even now, after everything, still believes he is the hero of the story. He cried at your door, and he believes he is the one being treated unfairly." Hazel thought about the man standing soaked in the hallway on Friday night, and she knew Raymond was right. "That's the most dangerous part of a person," Raymond said. "Not the part that knows it's bad, the part that doesn't know." Near 1 o'clock in the morning, Hazel stood and went inside. At the door, she turned back. "You haven't promised me anything about him, have you?" "No," Raymond said. "I haven't promised anything." The message came through Sal on Tuesday morning. Raymond's mother wanted to see her, alone, at 10 o'clock. Rosalind Marchetti was 69 years old, seated in the dining room of the house across town with a cup of tea and a file turned face down in front of her, and she didn't invite Hazel to sit immediately. First, she studied her for a while. "You know I had someone look into you," she said. "I assumed you did. From the first week, before the wedding in Watch Hill." She gestured toward the chair across from her. "I wanted to know what kind of person you were, because my son hasn't allowed anyone near him for 20 years, and suddenly there was a schoolteacher scolding him in the middle of a restaurant." Hazel sat down. "What did you find?" "I found a woman with 3 bank accounts, none of them holding more than $3,000, and not one expense for herself in the past 14 months, except for a pair of shoes she wears to work." Rosalind lifted her teacup. "But I also found this." She turned the file over and pushed it across the table. It was a notarized copy of an agreement dated June 11th, 2020, 5 pages long, typed in a font no major law office used anymore. Hazel recognized it immediately. She had sat in a small room at the law school's legal clinic with a final-year student whose name she could no longer remember, a young man with glasses who had asked her the same question again and again, whether she had written the material or whether the two of them had written it together, and she had told him that she had written it, and he had continued typing. "My people took it from the company archives," Rosalind said. "It was there the entire time. No one hid it. No one bothered to read it." Hazel turned to page 4, section 7. The licensor retained full copyright ownership of every teaching material she had created. The recipient was granted only a license to use those materials, not an assignment of ownership. Then came Section 7.3, exactly 2 lines long, written by a 25-year-old law student because he had been taught to protect a client from the danger the client hadn't yet thought to imagine. This license shall terminate automatically if the ownership structure of the recipient changes by more than 25% from its structure on the date of execution. Hazel read those 2 lines 3 times. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering the chaotic afternoon at the legal clinic 4 years ago, when she had been so consumed with her mounting personal debt and school expenditures that she had blindly signed the legal student's standard boilerplate attachments without reading the fine print. "This clause gives me the ground to terminate," Hazel said, "provided we can present official proof that Braxton Harrow secretly acquired over 25% of the company." "Exactly," Rosalind said, "without the paper trail of their hidden corporate restructuring to bring it to light. This document is just sitting silently in a file, which means that for the past 14 months, that company has been teaching with material it no longer has the right to use." Hazel placed one hand on the file. She was about to say thank you. Rosalind raised a hand to stop her, the same gesture her son had made in a restaurant on a rainy night. "I'm not giving you this to save you," she said. "I'm giving it to you to see what you do with it." At 6:40 that evening, Hazel parked on the second level of the public garage on Dorrance Street, where she had arranged to meet Walter and give him a copy. She had just locked her car when a dark sedan glided toward her and stopped about 13 feet away, and Vincent Marchetti stepped out of the back seat. He didn't come closer. He stood about 10 feet from her with both hands in his coat pockets, and he spoke in the tone of a man discussing the rental price of a warehouse. "Miss Whitlock, I know who you are." "Good. That saves time." He nodded toward the car. $500,000. Clean money, transferred through a scholarship fund bearing your mother's name, if you want the paperwork to look respectable. In return, you withdraw everything, you stop speaking to anyone, and you leave Rhode Island. Any state you like. I hear Vermont is a comfortable place to live. And if I don't leave? Vincent was silent for 2 seconds. "You teach 4th grade at Fox Point Elementary School," he said. "Room 21. The students are dismissed at 3:10. There is a crosswalk directly outside the gate, with no traffic signal. Only one crossing guard holding a sign. I think you understand what I'm saying without needing me to say anything more." He didn't take another step toward her. He didn't remove anything from his pockets. He only stood there, and beneath the yellow lights of the parking garage, Hazel saw a 44-year-old man who was absolutely certain he had just ended the conversation. She didn't step back. She didn't tremble. She glanced down at her wristwatch, then raised her eyes to him. "You said that at 6:41 this evening," she said. The signing ceremony for LadderUp's $12 million funding round was held in the same Ocean House ballroom in Watch Hill, 4 weeks after that night in the parking garage, and Gianna Marchetti prepared Hazel's legal documents, 3 identical sets with every page numbered, and a summary sheet at the front of each one, so that someone without legal training could understand it in 3 minutes. Hazel didn't wear a dress. She wore the same outfit she had worn on her first day of teaching 5 years earlier, a pale blue blouse and a gray skirt, the only thing in her closet she hadn't bought for anyone else. She entered at 6:45, walked directly to the head of the long table where 4 fund representatives were seated, and asked for 3 minutes. Grant said no. The silver-haired man in the gray suit sitting at the center of the table looked at her and said, "Let her speak." Hazel placed the first document on the table to the left. It was the agreement from June of 2020, already open to page 4, and she said only one sentence, that she had always retained authorship rights, and that the license to use the materials had automatically terminated when the ownership structure changed by more than 25% in March of 2024. She placed the second document beside it, the assignment agreement dated 2022, accompanied by a handwriting examination report, concluding that the signature on page 4 hadn't been written by her hand. She placed down the third document, Walter Kessler's map of the money flow, 38% of tuition paid in cash, 9 locations receiving federal subsidies, and $1,800,000 in seed funding transferred from Braxton Harrow Capital, 4 weeks before the date, on the second document. Then she placed down the fourth, the receipt confirming that formal complaints had been filed with the Rhode Island Department of Education and the Office of the Rhode Island Attorney General 3 days earlier, bearing an official acceptance stamp and case number. All 4 documents lay in a straight line across the table, and no one in that ballroom said a word for about 10 seconds. Beneath her pale blue blouse, The tiny digital transmitter provided by Agent Dana Coyle hummed silently, broadcasting every word directly to the federal vehicles parked outside. Then Hazel spoke the only sentence that belonged entirely to her. "I didn't come here to take this company. I came to take back my name." The silver-haired man read the summary page in the file, read the fourth document again, then closed his briefcase and stood. The other three stood with him. No one shook hands. Marilyn Hollis was seated at the second table, and she rose and called her son by all three of his names, Grant Michael Hollis. But Grant didn't turn to look at his mother. Bree Hollis walked around the head of the long table, pulled out a chair, and sat beside Hazel without saying anything. At the side entrance, 2 agents entered with Dana Coyle, and they escorted Vincent Marchetti from the room in silence, without handcuffing him in front of the crowd, and without a single word being spoken loudly. He didn't resist. As he passed the far end of the room, he looked toward the back wall, where Raymond had been standing since the beginning of the event, leaning against it with both hands in his pockets, never taking a single step forward during those 3 minutes. When nearly everyone had left, Hazel walked over to him. "This time, you didn't say anything," she said. "This time, you didn't need me to," he answered. 6 months later, Ladder Up filed for bankruptcy, and all 11 locations closed within 9 weeks. Grant Hollis taught part-time on contract at a suburban test preparation center, where no one knew he had once appeared on the cover of a magazine. Sloane Merrick was charged as an accomplice in the creation and use of fraudulent documents, and her marriage lasted exactly 7 months. Raymond Marchetti withdrew from the parts of his business he would never name to Hazel, retained the port transportation and construction operations, and for the first time in 20 years, his books could withstand an audit from beginning to end. Marilyn Hollis sent Hazel a 3-page handwritten letter, and Hazel read every word, then placed it in a drawer without replying and without anger. Hazel opened the Whitlock Center in Fox Point, a free learning center for elementary school students in the neighborhood, with her name printed on the cover of the curriculum exactly where it should have been since 2020. Walter Kessler served as the volunteer accountant and refused to accept a single dollar. Mia Kessler was the first student to enroll, and on opening day, she stood at the entrance and read the name on the sign aloud for everyone waiting in line behind her to hear. One afternoon in September, after the final class had gone home, Raymond walked into an empty classroom and sat in a child's plastic chair because it was the only seat left in the room, and he told her, "I didn't save you. I only stood beside you. And now I'd like to ask permission to stand there a little longer." Hazel looked at the nameplate outside the door, then nodded. This story leaves us with 3 lessons. First, respecting a human being begins with placing their name correctly upon the work they have done, because stealing credit leaves no visible wound, yet it takes away the hardest thing to recover, the feeling that one truly exists in this world. Second, being rescued and having someone stand beside you are entirely different things. A person who truly loves us doesn't stand in front of us and block the way. They stand beside us and remain silent long enough for us to speak for ourselves. Third, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it is simply the time a person uses to prepare. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share it so we can continue listening to compelling stories every day. How did this story make you feel? And has anyone in your life ever taken credit that rightfully belonged to you? Please leave a comment below so we can hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video excellent health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.